Hello, my name is Jackafe, and welcome to the best nodes you can take in the Ascension class of Titan for the Warrior in Path of Exile 2. And this, of course, is based on my extensive experience of playing the game for a total of 0 hours. What? I can't fucking do this type of shit in order to pass the time? So Grinding Gear Games recently released all 12 Ascension passive trees, and we're gonna take a deeper dive look at the Titan. And I'll be walking over personally the nodes I feel are the most powerful and which personally is the build I'm going to approach. And even though we don't know fuck all about anything regarding the passive skill tree, the nodes, the charms, the jewels, well, I'm gonna do my best anyway. You know why? Because I'm fucking bored and this has been the longest week of my life waiting for this launch. So who knows? You may just learn something. And if not, well, it's not entirely a waste of time, because that means after watching this video, you're one step closer to the launch of Path of Exile 2 as well. You're welcome. With that being said, guys, let's get it. Hello, boys and girls. So this is the recently released Ascension tree for Titan for the Warrior. Now, we're going to do a little bit of theory crafting based on absolute no theory. No, I'm kidding. But for me, the Titan Warrior is absolutely going to be the Ascendency class and tree that I choose for PoE 2. We don't play pussy-ass classes on this channel that have to dress up in cloth and dance around like a ballerina. But in all seriousness, this is going to be a great choice for anyone that enjoys more of the classic archetype of being a unga bunga bam bam, strength giga chad. This is certainly going to have a more methodical play style, slower, and it's going to rely on setting up the right conditions, especially in the form of proccing heavy stuns in order to unleash big dick damage or otherwise cause major earthquakes or eruptions around you for additional AoE. This Ascendency is definitely going to synergize well with very high cooldowns, hard-hitting abilities, with, huge offensive potential, especially against stunned enemies. For me, the way I see building my character is to focus on perhaps maybe some high health regen and just proccing stuns as fast as possible. I personally love the playstyle of stun locking enemies in place and just preventing them from playing the fucking game. This is actually also going to add another fun layer to the game aside of just melting people's health bars, because there's going to be a secondary bar that's going to act as essentially a stun meter. So it's just going to add an extra dimension to the game, I think, and make it funner to play. And who doesn't love proccing stun or stagger animations off their enemies and leaving them on their knees? Overall, though, I think that for the Warrior, this is going to be a really, really safe Ascendancy choice to pick, especially for perhaps newer players to the genre. With that said, let's go over the tree in more detail, some of the nodes, and what I feel may be the most powerful builds coming from this, and also how this may synergize with the Warrior's toolkit. Now, the first thing is to understand, well, how many Ascendancy points will we get? Now, don't hold me to this. Obviously, I haven't played the fucking game. It hasn't even launched. But in PoE 1, there was a total of 8 Ascendancy points. Essentially, there's going to be 3 trials in the game, and 2 that are being launched in early access that you'll find throughout the campaign. One will be in Act 2, I believe, and the other in Act 3, and they essentially act as a gauntlet. Each time you complete the gauntlet and ascend, you get 2 Ascendancy points. And this is done by completing the first 4 rooms of any of the trials. Now, we don't know how many rooms are required for the next few Ascension trials. However, we can speculate for every 4 rooms, they will give you 2 Ascension points each, up to a total of 8. But again, feel free to keep me honest in the comments below. Now, personally, the first branch of the tree that I am going to level up is towards nodes 6 and 7. So the first node, being 6, is crushing impacts. This means that your hits are crushing blows, and crushing blows cause a heavy stun on enemies that are primed for a stun. I get it. Complicated at first, but let's break this down. So a heavy stun is what we normally think of in a game. right? It incapacitates or immobilizes the target. They are unable to act. Now, hitting an enemy builds towards that heavy stun, right? That like stagger stun meter. And that's based on the damage dealt. And different enemies have different heavy stun thresholds, right? And durations. Now, prime for stun means that when a normal or magic or rare or unique enemy hit a certain threshold, that being 40, 60, 70, 80% respectively, that means the crushing blows will actually be able to heavy stun them. So basically, crushing impacts acts as a way to heavy stun enemies faster at a lower percentage of the stagger bar than normal, right? Therefore, you're proccing stuns a lot faster using less abilities, and it takes less damage to heavy stun them. Now, this synergizes really well with Node 7, which is Surprising Strength, which provides a 40% more increased damage against heavy stun enemies, right? So the objective here is that you're essentially using abilities to proc stun, doing damage, right? To increase the stun. This synergizes with Crushing Blows so that they get stunned faster, and then you will be, once they're stunned, you'll be using your heavy, high damage abilities like Hammer of the Gods. So as you can see, this build potential is quite huge, and you should absolutely build that tree all the way till 7. So you essentially use abilities to build the stagger meter as fast as possible, and then you're going to use a massive damage ability once they're stunned. It's going to be rinse and repeat. Now gearing towards the north side of the tree on points 2 and 3 is your other significant damage-oriented build. And this is essentially using earthquakes and shocks and aftershocks in order to do increased AoE damage. So the first node, number 2, is Earthbreaker. You have a 20% chance for slam skills that you use yourself to cause aftershocks, improving the slam damage, right? So essentially, the aftershock will deal the same damage at the initial impact. So we're not sure at this time if there are multiple aftershocks that are applied and whether they stack on each other, right? We're not sure if totems at this time that have slam skills actually count as you using it yourself. So there's a lot of testing that needs to be done there. Nevertheless, you can just simply look at it as a flat 20% increase of damage on your slam skills. Now, point 3 is where the diminishing returns start to happen. Point 3 being Ancestral Empowerment. Every second slam skill you use yourself is ancestrally boosted. What's that? An ancestrally boosted skill has a 20% more damage in area of effect. So let's break that down. This essentially means that every second slam skill you use is going to have the 20% more increased damage, but not the first, right? So if you're going to primarily be using the same ability over and over, this is effectively saying that you're increasing their damage by 10%, right? Because point 3, the Ancestral Empowerment, is conditional. And typically, well, as was the case in PoE 1, we'll see if that's the meta in PoE 2, but you typically want the end game goal for hyper min-max builds was essentially using one ability over and over again. So it really depends on really how fast you can get the slams off, right? If you're getting it faster than, let's say, a second, then you could make the case, right, that the damage is higher than 10%, right? But that remains to be seen. I think that this playstyle is better suited if you play alternative skills, right? If you're mixing it up with, let's say, utility, for an example, and then a buff and then a slam, right? But it just seems to me like it's also going to be somewhat difficult to keep track of what actually slams you're using, right? In order to proc the second slam, you know what I mean? So there, it could be a bit of an iffy play style there. Now, again, without looking at what the items are, or the unique items, or the jewels, or the, support gems, and all the charms and all the jazz, right? I can't holistically say at this point how effective this particular tree will be, but who knows, right? There could be some very niche, awesome builds that come from this, especially with the area of effect damage. Now, the middle of the tree is the most interesting, and I feel will have, from a min-max perspective, the biggest impact on a player's power spike. The reason why you're going the middle tree is for node 5, which is hulking form. Now, this is absolutely bananas. The sheer scope of this just seems crazy to me. So what this does is a multiplicative 50% increase of all small passive skills. That is all the small nodes in the passive skill tree. Now, what we don't know is if it's every small node in the passive skill tree. Now, from what this is saying, this means that this is all small passive skill tree nodes. And there are a ton on the passive skill tree, right? Everything from increased elemental effects to increased melee damage. Everything from max resistances or, increased damage against broken enemies. So all of that is multiplied by 50%. Now, I don't know if, let's say, the attributes count as a small passive skill, right? They're on the attribute highway. I'm not sure, but imagine if all your strength nodes get multiplied by 50%. So you could just see the sheer amount of power this could provide, especially when you look at this skill tree, and I'll link it in the description below of what we think is the most accurate. We'll find out Friday, but there's a ton of large cluster of small nodes, right? So this could be extremely powerful, especially as it relates to perhaps increasing your skill duration or your stun duration. We'll find out certainly how powerful this is over time, right? With, how uniques or jewels work or etc. But 100%, this is definitely going to be highly sought after for a lot of, theory builders and min-maxers. So it's going to be exciting what comes out of that. Now, in order to get to hulking form, you need to get number 4, colossal capacity. This is just quality of life, right? You carry a chest and it has 20 inventory slots. I can see how people may be upset that you have to take that node and it doesn't have a direct influence on player power, but at the same time, I feel like that is a great way to balance the game with how strong the node 5 hulking form actually will be. Now, if colossal capacity somehow affects the number of charm slots you can have, well, that begs to be seen. Finally, what I think makes this a very, beginner-friendly ascension tree is the fact that there is actually 2 defensive nodes, that being Stone Skin and Mysterious Lineage. So in PoE 1, typically defensive passives were known to be very hard to access, so the fact that there is 2 readily accessible here bodes really well for this class. Now, ultimately, again, that's going to be entirely based on your own ability to easily stay alive or the game's difficulty and how it scales. So I'll probably not rush into defensive nodes first, but it's certainly something you can entertain if you find that you're getting your ass fucking kicked. So the 2 that we have here, starting with Stone Skin, now you get a 50% more armor from equipped body armor. Now, no one really understands specifically at this time how armor is calculated in PoE 2. We don't know, for example, how much armor reduces how much physical damage taken. In PoE 1, the rule of thumb is the higher the armor, the more effective it is. It was good against mitigating small hits. However, in PoE 2, I believe that it will apply on all physical damage. That even includes physical dots, such as bleed. Now, we don't understand the diminishing returns. It's really hard to know, especially when we don't really know that much about the monster damage or the monster damage types that will be in the game, but that will be left to discover. And lastly, we have Mysterious Lineage. It was a 20% increased health before, but now it's nerfed down to 15. Now, although there aren't actually any max HP nodes in the passive tree, from what we know, with every investment in strength, you will get +2 to your max health. So this can stack quite effectively, right? It's 15% more HP. And typically vitality is always very well needed if you are shit at mechanics. Now, if I had to highlight at this time some of the skills that we know, right, that synergize very well with this type of Ascendancy, certainly what comes to mind is Hammer of the Gods. This is probably the strongest skill that was showcased so far. Now, what this does is essentially does a massive hammer that falls from the fucking sky and it completely splats its target. It actually increases your attack damage by 1,307. So once the target is obviously heavy stunned, you can see how this could absolutely do so much damage with the aspect of crushing impacts and surprising strength. Another very strong slam that will do well with this build is probably going to be Sunder. You essentially slam the ground. It creates a wave of churning terrain that damages enemies in a sequence of areas in front of you. The number of enemies hit by the wave will release a shock wave. Now, just based on the numbers, this increases damage effectiveness of 237% and 100% increased critical damage bonus, which just makes this absurd for endgame. Another very good skill I'm probably going to have in my arsenal is going to be Seismic Cry. Now, Seismic Cry is mostly physical oriented, but essentially, if a heavy stunned enemy is hit, your next slam does an additional aftershock, right? So you can see how this could synergize very well with needing enemies to be heavily stunned. And another thing that's really good about this cry is that it increases your stun buildup by 400%. Well, that's it. That's all the Ascendancy knows for the Titan class for the Warrior. Again, I'm not going to run through every single skill in the game because, number one, we don't know them all. Plus the support gems, there's a lot here. This is not at all intended to be some type of guide. I'm very looking forward to this game. I hope that you had fun and that this was insightful. Feel free to comment what you're going to be playing, suggestions, builds. If you're excited, I will be streaming this on YouTube for those that are interested to hop by and say hello. Please like and subscribe, comment. You know the drill. And jack-offs, I'll see you on the next one.